What happens when Hollywood royalty meets late-night arrogance head-on? You won't believe what unfolds when Robert De Niro sits down with Bill Maher for what was supposed to be a routine interview, but quickly spirals into television chaos. The legendary actor, known for his no-nonsense approach and fierce political convictions, came ready to discuss his latest project, but Maher had other plans entirely. What started as casual banter would soon explode into one of the most brutal confrontations in late-night television history, leaving viewers stunned and the host scrambling to maintain control of his own show. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses collide in spectacular fashion. The tension was palpable from the moment De Niro walked onto the set. The audience erupted in their usual applause, but seasoned viewers could sense something different in the air. Maher, sporting his signature smirk, welcomed the acting legend with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm, but those familiar with his interviewing style could detect the underlying edge in his voice. De Niro, dressed in his characteristic dark suit, settled into the guest chair with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced down movie moguls, directors, and critics for over 5 decades. "Bobby, great to have you back," Maher began, leaning forward with that calculated casualness he'd perfected over years of hosting. "You know, I was just thinking before the show about how you've been so vocal lately about politics, about Trump, about everything really. Some people are saying maybe actors should stick to acting, you know what I mean?" The question landed like a lead balloon. De Niro's expression didn't change immediately, but those who knew him could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in his posture. The audience sensed the shift too, their energy becoming more focused, more anticipatory. "Well, Bill," De Niro replied, his voice carrying that unmistakable gravitas, "I think people who have platforms have responsibilities. When you see injustice, when you see corruption, when you see lies being spread, you speak up. That's what Americans do." Maher chuckled, but it wasn't entirely friendly. Right. But come on, don't you think there's something a little rich about millionaire actors lecturing regular people about their politics? I mean, you live in a world most people can't even imagine. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. De Niro's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and he leaned back slightly, studying Maher with the same intensity he brought to his most memorable film roles. The audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something beyond the usual late-night television banter. "You know what's rich, Bill?" De Niro's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath now. "What's rich is someone who's made a career out of mocking politicians and celebrities suddenly getting sensitive about who gets to have opinions. You've been doing political commentary for decades. What makes your opinion more valid than mine?" Maher's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Well, I'm a comedian, Bobby. I make jokes. You're out there calling people names, getting really angry, really personal. Some might say it's unbecoming of a legend like yourself." The condescension in Maher's tone was unmistakable now, and De Niro's response was swift and surgical. "Unbecoming? You want to talk about unbecoming? How about a talk show host who invites guests on just to ambush them? How about someone who hides behind comedy when they want to say something nasty but doesn't want to take responsibility for it?" The tension in the studio was electric. Camera operators adjusted their positions, sensing they were capturing something special. The audience members looked back and forth between the two men like spectators at a tennis match, but this was no game. Maher tried to laugh it off, but his discomfort was becoming visible. Hey, I'm not ambushing anybody. I'm just asking questions. That's what interviewers do, right? We push a little, we probe. It's called journalism." Journalism. De Niro's eyebrows raised slightly, and for the first time, a hint of amusement crept into his expression, though it wasn't warm. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you're trying to score cheap points with your audience by taking shots at your guests." The accusation hit its mark. Maher's face flushed slightly, and his trademark confidence began to waver. "Look, Bobby, I respect you, I really do. But you've got to admit, some of the things you've said, some of the language you've used, it's pretty harsh. Don't you think you might be going a little overboard sometimes?" De Niro leaned forward now, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone that had made him legendary in films like Goodfellas and Casino. Going overboard? Bill, let me tell you something about going overboard. Going overboard is when a country elects someone who lies every time he opens his mouth. Going overboard is when people die because of misinformation and conspiracy theories. Going overboard is when democracy itself is under attack and people like you want to treat it like it's all just material for jokes. The studio had gone completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped moving, transfixed by the raw intensity of De Niro's words. Maher, for perhaps the first time in his hosting career, appeared genuinely speechless, his mouth opening and closing without sound. But De Niro wasn't finished. You want to know what's really unbecoming, Bill? What's unbecoming is using your platform to normalize the abnormal. What's unbecoming is treating fascism like it's just another political opinion worthy of debate. What's unbecoming is thinking that being clever is more important than being right. Maher finally found his voice, but it came out strained, defensive. Now wait a minute, that's not fair. I've been critical of Trump too. I've made jokes about him for years. You can't say I've been normalizing anything. Jokes, De Niro repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. That's your defense? Jokes. While people are losing their rights, while the planet is burning, while democracy is hanging by a thread, your contribution is jokes. The confrontation was escalating rapidly now, each exchange more heated than the last. Maher's face was getting redder, his composure cracking under the sustained assault from one of Hollywood's most respected figures. The audience could sense they were witnessing something unprecedented, a complete breakdown of the usual late-night format. I'm a comedian, Bobby. Maher snapped, his voice rising for the first time. That's what I do. I make people laugh about serious topics. It's called satire. It's been around for centuries. Some of us don't have the luxury of just being angry all the time. De Niro's eyes flashed dangerously. Luxury? You think being angry about injustice is a luxury? You think caring about the future of this country is something only wealthy actors can afford? You're more out of touch than I thought. The insult landed like a physical blow. Maher's entire demeanor changed, his trademark smugness replaced by something uglier, more desperate. Out of touch. Me? You live in Tribeca, Bobby. You probably haven't been in a grocery store in 20 years. You're telling me I'm out of touch? But De Niro was ready for this line of attack. At least I don't pretend to be the voice of the common man while sitting in my ivory tower, making jokes about things that actually matter to people's lives. At least I don't hide behind comedy when I want to make a point, but I'm too cowardly to stand behind it. The word cowardly hung in the air like a challenge. Maher's face went from red to purple, his hands clenching into fists on his desk. The pretense of civilized discourse was completely abandoned now, replaced by something raw and primitive. Cowardly. Maher's voice was barely controlled now. You want to talk about cowardly? How about an actor who thinks playing tough guys in movies makes him qualified to lecture the rest of us about politics? How about someone who confuses being loud with being right? The personal attack was exactly what De Niro had been waiting for. His response came with the precision of a master craftsman, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. And what happened next would change everything. De Niro's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. You know what, Bill? You're right. I did play tough guys in movies. But here's the difference between you and me. When the cameras stopped rolling, I didn't stop caring about what was right and what was wrong. You, on the other hand, you've been playing the same character for so long. I don't think you remember who you really are anymore. The studio audience was completely silent now, some visibly uncomfortable as they witnessed their beloved host being systematically dismantled by one of cinema's greatest actors. Maher's face had gone from purple to pale, his confidence evaporating. Like morning mist. That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of pretending to be other people. Maher shot back, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. At least I'm honest about what I do. I don't pretend my job makes me some kind of moral authority. De Niro leaned back in his chair, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Moral authority? Bill, I never claimed to be a moral authority. I'm just a citizen who gives a damn. But you? You've set yourself up as some kind of political guru, some wise sage who's above it all. You mock everyone. You take cheap shots at everyone. And then when someone calls you on it, you hide behind your job description. The accusation struck home. Maher's hands were shaking slightly now as he reached for his water glass, trying to buy time to formulate a response. But De Niro wasn't giving him any breathing room. You want to know what really bothers me about you, Bill? It's not just that you're cynical. Hell, we all get cynical sometimes. It's that you've made cynicism your brand. You've turned not caring into entertainment. You've made apathy cool, and that's dangerous. Maher slammed his water glass down harder than necessary, water sloshing onto his desk. Apathy. Apathy. I've been doing political comedy for decades. I've been fighting the good fight longer than you've been making political statements. Fighting the good fight. De Niro's laugh was harsh and bitter. Bill, you've been sitting on the sidelines throwing spitballs while the house burns down around us. You think making jokes about politicians is the same as actually standing up to them? You think being clever is the same as being brave. The word brave was like a red flag to a bull. Maher's composure finally cracked completely. Brave? You want to talk about brave? How about someone who's been taking shots at every president for 30 years? How about someone who's been calling out bullshit when it wasn't popular? I was. Making fun of Clinton when everyone loved him. I was questioning Obama when everyone treated him like a saint. I've been consistent my whole career. De Niro shook his head slowly, like a disappointed teacher dealing with a difficult student. Consistent? Bill, the only thing you've been consistent about is staying safely in the middle, making sure you never take a real stand on anything. You take shots at everyone equally, so you never have to actually commit to anything. That's not bravery. That's cowardice dressed up as wisdom. The personal attack was devastating in its accuracy. Maher's entire public persona was built on being the guy who could see through everyone's bullshit, who was too smart to be fooled by any politician or cause. To have that image shattered by someone of De Niro's stature in front of his own audience was clearly unbearable. You know what, Bobby? Maher's voice was getting higher, more strained. Maybe the reason I don't get as worked up as you do is because I'm not desperate to stay relevant. Maybe I don't need to reinvent myself as some kind of political activist, because my career is already secure. The low blow was exactly what De Niro had been expecting. His response was swift and surgical. Relevant? Bill, you think this is about staying relevant? You think I'm speaking out because I need attention? I'm 78 years old. I don't need anything from anybody. I speak out because I have grandchildren, and I want them to inherit a world that's not completely screwed up. The mention of his grandchildren seemed to unlock something deeper in De Niro's anger. His voice became more passionate, more personal. You want to know what desperation looks like, Bill? Desperation is a man who's built his entire identity around being the smartest guy in the room. And now he's watching the room burn down while he's still trying to come up with clever one-liners about the fire. Maher was visibly struggling now, his usual quick wit completely deserting him. That's not fair. I care about things. I care about the country. I just don't think screaming about it helps anything. Screaming? De Niro's voice was deadly quiet now. Bill, you think I'm screaming? You think passion is screaming? You know what screaming looks like. Screaming is what you do when you're losing an argument and you don't have facts to back you up. Screaming is what you do when you're more concerned with winning than being right. The prediction was eerily accurate, because Maher's voice was indeed getting louder and more desperate. I'm not losing anything. This is my show. These are my viewers. You're a guest here, Bobby, and guests are supposed to be respectful. The appeal to his host status was a sign of how far Maher had fallen. De Niro recognized it immediately and moved in for the kill. Respectful? You want to talk about respect? How about respecting your audience enough to tell them the truth instead of hiding behind jokes? How about respecting your guests enough not to ambush them with gotcha questions? How about respecting yourself enough to stand for something instead of just standing against everything? Each question was like a hammer. Blow. And Maher was crumbling under the sustained assault. His face was flushed, his breathing was rapid, and his hands were gesticulating wildly as he tried to regain control of the situation. I stand for plenty of things. I stand for free speech. I stand for asking tough questions. I stand for not letting politicians get away with lying to the American people. De Niro leaned forward, his eyes boring into Maher's. No, Bill. You stand for Bill Maher. Everything else is just content for your show. You don't ask tough questions, you ask mean questions. There's a difference. One comes from a place of wanting to know the truth. The other comes from wanting to look smart. The distinction was brutal in its clarity, and Maher knew it. His response was increasingly frantic. That's not true. I've taken real risks. I've been canceled before. I've stood up to political correctness when it wasn't popular. Canceled. De Niro's voice dripped with disdain. Bill, you got in trouble for making a tasteless joke and then spent the next 20 years using it as proof of your martyrdom. You turned one moment of consequence into a career-long victim narrative. That's not standing up to anything. That's marketing. The accusation hit Maher like a physical blow. His defining moment of professional adversity, the thing he'd built, his rebel image around, had just been dismissed as a publicity stunt. The audience could see him deflating in real time, his confident persona cracking like an eggshell, but De Niro wasn't finished. He could sense his opponent was wounded, and, like the predator he'd portrayed so many times on screen, he moved in for the final strike. What came next would push Maher completely over the edge. You know what the real tragedy is here, Bill? De Niro's voice carried the weight of decades of experience, both on screen and off. The real tragedy is that you actually had the platform to make a difference. You had the audience, you had the reach, you had the influence. And what did you do with it? You wasted it on cheap laughs and false equivalencies. Maher's face was contorting now, caught between rage and something that looked dangerously close to panic. I didn't waste anything. I've influenced millions of people. I've changed minds. I've made people think. Made people think. De Niro's laugh was sharp and cutting. Bill, you've made people cynical. You've made them believe that caring about anything is naive, that passion is embarrassing, that everyone in politics is equally corrupt, so why bother trying to tell the difference? You've turned an entire generation into spectators instead of participants. The accusation was so precise, so devastating in its accuracy, that several audience members actually gasped. This wasn't just a personal attack anymore. This was a complete deconstruction of Maher's entire life's work, delivered by someone with the moral authority to make it stick. Maher was spiraling now, his voice cracking as he tried to defend himself. That's not what I do. I encourage people to think critically. I encourage them to question authority. I'm trying to make them smarter. Smarter. De Niro leaned back, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. Bill, you've confused being cynical with being smart for so long that you can't tell the difference anymore. You think mocking people who care makes you intelligent. You think finding fault with everyone makes you wise. But wisdom isn't about being above it all, Bill. Wisdom is about knowing when to get in the fight. The philosophical argument was clearly beyond Maher's ability to counter. He was a comedian facing off against one of the greatest actors of his generation, and the mismatch was becoming more obvious with each exchange. His responses were becoming more desperate, more personal. Easy to say when you don't have to do this every week. Easy to be pure when you just show up for interviews and get to leave. I have to fill an hour of television 5 nights a week. I have to find something to say about everything that happens. You get to pick and choose your battles. De Niro nodded, slowly, as if he'd been expecting this exact defense. You're right, Bill. You do have to fill an hour 5 nights a week. And for years, you've chosen to fill it with the easiest possible content, making fun of people who are actually trying to do something. Politicians, activists, anyone who sticks their neck out for a cause. It's easy content, isn't it? Tear people down instead of building something up. The observation was clinical in its precision, and it clearly struck home. Maher's entire business model had just been exposed as intellectual laziness masquerading as sophistication. His face was now completely flushed, beads of sweat visible on his forehead under the studio lights. I don't just tear people down. I've had serious conversations. I've tackled important issues. I've interviewed presidents and Nobel Prize winners. And made jokes about all of them, De Niro finished. Bill, that's the problem. Everything is material to you. Everything is content. You can't have a serious conversation about anything because you're always looking for the punchline. You've turned everything into entertainment, even the things that are literally matters of life and death. The studio was dead silent now. Even the crew members had stopped pretending to work, all attention focused on the complete dismantling happening in front of them. Maher looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would come to his rescue. But he was alone on the stage with a master performer who was giving the performance of his life. That's what comedy is. Maher's voice was getting shrill now, his composure completely gone. Comedy is finding humor in everything. It's how we cope with the world. It's how we deal with tragedy and trauma and all the horrible things that happen. De Niro shook his head sadly. No, Bill. Comedy is supposed to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. You've got it backwards. You comfort the comfortable by telling them they're smart to not care about anything, and you afflict the afflicted by mocking them for giving a damn. The reversal was perfect, using comedy theory against the comedian himself. Maher looked like he'd been slapped, his mouth opening and closing without sound. When he finally found his voice, it came out as a strangled shout. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just an actor. You pretend to be other people for a living. What makes you think you understand comedy or politics or anything else? The personal attack was exactly what De Niro had been waiting for. His response was swift and final. You're right, Bill. I am just an actor. I pretend to be other people for a living. But you know what? Even when I'm pretending to be someone else, I'm more authentic than you are when you're supposedly being yourself. The insult was so perfectly crafted, so devastating in its simplicity, that it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Maher's face went white, then red, then white again. His hands were shaking visibly now as he gripped the edge of his desk. How dare you? Maher's voice cracked as he shouted. How dare you come on my show and attack me like this? You're supposed to be here to promote your movie. Not to what, Bill? De Niro's voice was calm now, almost gentle, which somehow made it more menacing. Not to tell the truth? Not to call you out on your bullshit? Not to treat you the way you've been treating your guests for decades. The reversal was complete. Maher, who had built his career on ambushing guests and putting them on the defensive, was now experiencing what it felt like to be on the other side of his own tactics. And he was handling it about as well as could be expected from someone who could dish it out but couldn't take it. This is my show, Maher screamed, his voice echoing off the studio walls. These are my cameras. This is my audience. You don't get to come here and what, Bill? De Niro stood up slowly, his movement causing several cameramen to adjust their shots. I don't get to have an opinion. I don't get to push back when you try to belittle me. I thought you were all about free speech and tough questions. Or does that only work one way? Maher was completely unhinged now, standing behind his desk and gesticulating wildly. Get out. Just get out. I don't have to sit here and take this from you or anyone else. This is my show and I decide who stays and who goes. De Niro smiled coldly, the expression sending chills through the studio audience. There it is. The real Bill Maher. When the going gets tough, when someone actually challenges you instead of playing along with your little games, you fold like a cheap suit. You can't handle your own medicine. Get out. Maher's voice was hoarse from shouting now, his face purple with rage. Security. Get him out of here. I want him off my set. But De Niro was already moving, standing with the dignity and grace that had made him a legend. He straightened his jacket and looked directly into the nearest camera, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned studio. Ladies and gentlemen, you just saw the real Bill Maher. Not the clever comedian, not the political satirist, not the fearless interviewer. Just a bully who can't take what he dishes out. Think about that the next time he's up there mocking someone for actually caring about something. With that, De Niro turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the dead silence of the studio. Behind him, Maher was still screaming incoherently, his voice becoming more shrill and desperate with each word. Don't you walk away from me. Don't you dare walk away from me. This is my show. Mine. But De Niro didn't look back. He walked through the studio doors with his head held high, leaving behind a broken host, a stunned audience, and what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked about moments in late-night television history. The cameras kept rolling as Maher continued his meltdown, completely oblivious to how pathetic he looked, his reputation in ruins and his credibility destroyed by a master craftsman who had just given the performance of a lifetime, the great Robert. De Niro had walked into that studio as a guest and walked out as a conqueror, leaving Bill Maher exposed as exactly what he'd always been, a small man with a big platform who had finally met someone bigger than his own ego.